At 3:47 a.m., my phone rang. A hospital voice said my daughter was alive and asking for me to I froze. Because we buried her 31 years ago. But then they described a mark only I knew. I drove through the night, praying it was real, and fearing what the truth would destroy. BY sunrise. Everything we believed was about to collapse. Before I take you back to that moment, let me ask you something small. Take a second to subscribe and leave a comment about where you're listening from. It helps these stories travel farther than I ever could. Hello. My voice sounded older than I felt. Static crackled. Then a woman spoke. Measured, professional, careful in a way that told me she was choosing her words like stepping stones across a river. Is this Mr. Daniel Harrington? Yes, I said, my hand tightening around the phone. Who's calling? My name is Lauren Gwynn. I'm a social services coordinator at St. Alden Medical Center in Harbor City. I'm calling about your daughter. The word daughter hit me like a blunt object. My daughter? I repeated, that's not possible. There was a pause, not confusion, but gravity. Sir, she said gently, the woman here says her name is Emily Harrington. She asked us to call you. The room tilted. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping beneath my weight. My wife, Claire, stirred beside me, half asleep. You have the wrong person, I said, my voice flat mechanical. My daughter died 30 years ago. Another pause, longer this time. Mr. Harrington. Laura said quietly, the woman here has identification. She also has a crescent-shaped birthmark on her left shoulder blade. She says you used to call it her moon mark when she was a child. I stopped breathing. No one knew that. Not the police. Not the private investigators. Not the reporters who'd swarmed our house in the 90s. That mark had been our secret. Something I'd made up when Emily was little because she was terrified of sleeping alone. I'd told her it meant she was protected, that the moon watched over her. My mouth went dry. Where did you say she is? I whispered. St. Alden Medical Center, the psychiatric unit. She was brought in 2 days ago after a crisis episode. She's stable now, and she's asking for you. The clock on my nightstand blinked 3:49 a.m. Harbor City was nearly 5 hours away. I'm coming, I said. I'm leaving now. I hung up before doubt could catch up to me. Claire was fully awake now, sitting upright, watching me with the expression she'd worn through every emergency, every false alarm, every anniversary of loss. Who was that? She asked carefully. I pulled on my jeans with shaking hands. Someone says they found Emily. Claire inhaled sharply. Daniel. I know, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. I know how it sounds. But she knew about the birthmark. She knew about the moon. Claire's face drained of color. We'd had calls before. Twice in the early years. Scammers. People who thought grief made you stupid. They always slipped up. Dates wrong. Details blurred. But this wasn't something you guessed. I'm coming with you, Claire said, already reaching for her sweater. No, I said softly. Not yet. Let me see her first. If this is real, I'll call you immediately. If it's not, I swallowed. I need you to be here when I come back. She understood. After 40 years together, she always did. The drive was endless. I turned off the radio. Silence felt safer. Emily had been 17 when she disappeared. November 12th. She'd told us she was going to study with a friend. We found out later she'd met an older boy instead, 22, worked at an auto shop near the docks. They'd argued. He'd left her at a bus stop near Alder Street after midnight. She never came home. For 3 years, Claire and I lived in a state of suspended collapse. Posters, phone calls, interviews. I worked. Claire barely slept. Then in 1995, they found remains outside Ridgewood Forest. The forensics were inconclusive, but the jacket looked like Emily's. The ring might have been hers. 70% certainty. 70% was enough to bury an empty casket and learn how to breathe again. St. Alden Medical Center rose out of the city like a concrete confession. Laura met me in the lobby, a woman in her late 30s, eyes tired but kind. I need to prepare you, she said as we walked. She's been living under another name for decades. We believe she experienced a dissociative break triggered by recovered memory. What name? I asked. Rachel Moore. We stopped outside a small room. She's scared, Laura said. Scared you won't believe her. Or worse, that you will. The door opened. A woman stood by the window. Thin, older, not the girl I'd lost. But when she turned, her eyes met mine, and everything inside me broke open. Dad, she said, and I knew, not because she looked like Emily, but because she was her, alive, waiting. And the world I thought had ended 30 years ago was about to begin again in ways I never imagined. I don't remember sitting down, but suddenly I was... The chair scraped softly against the floor, as if the room itself was trying not to disturb us. She stood there, hands clenched at her sides, shoulders drawn inward like she expected to be pushed away at any second. I don't know how long I can stay awake, she said quietly. They said I should rest, but I didn't want to sleep until I saw you. I was afraid if I closed my eyes, you wouldn't be real. Her voice wasn't the voice of a teenager. It carried weight. Years. But when she said those words, she sounded exactly like the child who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. You're real, I said, and only then realized my voice was shaking. I'm right here. She nodded, as if confirming something to herself, then sat back down slowly. I followed, perching on the edge of the hospital bed like I didn't deserve the space. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was fragile, like touching glass that might shatter if handled too roughly. They told me I should explain, she said eventually, but I don't know where to start. My memories don't come back in order. They come in flashes, smells, sounds, pieces that don't fit until they suddenly do. Take your time, I said. We have all the time you need. She looked up at me then, eyes glistening. You always said that. The first memory she described wasn't the night she vanished. It was our kitchen, the old one, with the yellow tile and the crooked cabinet door that never quite shut. She remembered standing on a chair, watching Claire roll dough on Saturday mornings. Cinnamon, butter, sugar, the way I'd pretend not to notice when she stole a bite. You burn the bottoms every time, she said, almost smiling. And Mom would pretend to be mad. Claire, hearing my wife described in the present tense felt like a knife wrapped in velvet. She used too much flour, Emily continued, but she said that was a secret. I closed my eyes. She wasn't guessing. No one could invent that. Then the memories shifted. She talked about the bus stop, the cold, the fight, how angry she'd been, at the boy, at herself, at me. She admitted she'd been scared to come home because of the argument we'd had over curfew, that she'd sat on a bench for a long time, crying, trying to decide what to do next. Then someone had approached her. A woman, she said, not threatening. She asked if I was okay, said she had a daughter my age, offered me coffee. Everything after that fractured. Rooms without windows. Being told her name was something else. Papers that said she belonged somewhere she didn't recognize. People who spoke softly while doing terrible things. Years where surviving meant becoming whoever they needed her to be. I didn't know I was Emily, she whispered. I didn't know I'd ever been anyone else. I thought this was just my life. I sat perfectly still, terrified that if I moved, I'd interrupt something sacred. When did it start to change? I asked. 5 years ago, she said. I started having dreams. A house with blue shutters. A man calling me Moon. I thought I was losing my mind. She laughed once, bitterly. Turns out I was remembering it. When the social media post resurfaced, an old missing person photo shared for an anniversary campaign. Something inside her cracked open. She recognized her own face. Younger, happier, still whole. I screamed, she said, in the grocery store. They had to call an ambulance. That's how she ended up here. When the nurse knocked gently to remind us of visiting limits, I barely registered it. Laura stepped in quietly, giving us a few more minutes. We'll need to do some things, she said gently. DNA confirmation, police interviews, therapy planning. Whatever she needs, I said instantly. Emily flinched. That's what scares me, she said after Laura left. I don't know how to be someone's daughter anymore. I reached for her hand. She hesitated. Then let me take it. You don't have to be anything, I said. You don't owe me a version of yourself. You're here. That's enough. Tears spilled then. Silent. Relentless. I thought you hated me, she whispered. For leaving. For disappearing. I hated myself. I said honestly. Every day I wondered what I should have done differently. But I never hated you. Not for a second. She pressed her forehead against my shoulder like she used to when she was small, and for the first time since that night 30 years ago, I felt the weight I'd been carrying shift, just a little. In the hallway afterward, Laura spoke to me in practical tones. There would be investigations, questions, trauma specialists. The remains we'd buried decades ago would need to be re-examined. If Emily is alive, she said carefully, then someone else is buried in her place. The thought made me nauseous. Another family. Another father who'd never stop waiting. We'll do whatever's right, I said. Driving home that night, I didn't feel joy. I felt something heavier. Responsibility. Hope tangled with fear. Emily wasn't a miracle wrapped neatly in a bow. She was a survivor. And bringing her back into our lives would change everything, past, present, and future. When I called Claire, she didn't speak for a long time. Then she said very quietly, "Bring her home." And I knew that whatever storms were coming next, we would face them together, because the past hadn't stayed buried. And it wasn't done asking for answers. The DNA test was done the next morning. A nurse came in with a small kit, speaking gently, explaining the process as if Emily were fragile glass. She swabbed Emily's cheek first, then mine. It took less than a minute, but the significance of it made my chest feel tight. 31 years of uncertainty reduced to 2 cotton tips sealed inside plastic. Results usually take about 10 days, the nurse said. Sometimes sooner. 10 days felt impossible. Emily stayed in the psychiatric unit while the doctors monitored her dissociative episodes. I visited every day. Sometimes she talked nonstop, memories spilling out like floodwater. Other days, she barely spoke at all, staring out the window as if the city beyond it might explain what had been taken from her. She asked about her mother on the 3rd day. Not directly. Not at first. "Do you still keep plants in the kitchen?" she asked, twisting the edge of her sleeve. "No," I said. After everything, we moved. Smaller place. She nodded, absorbing that. She always talked to them. Emily said they listened better than people. I swallowed. She did. A long pause. Is she? I didn't soften it. She'd lived too much reality for that. She passed away 12 years ago. Emily's face went still. Not shocked. Not surprised. Just hollowed. "I thought so," she whispered. I kept dreaming of her standing far away, like she was waving goodbye. She cried that day. Not loudly. Just tears sliding down while she stared at the floor. I sat with her, useless and aching, wishing grief were something a father could take on himself. On the 5th day, the police came. 2 detectives. Calm, professional, careful with their words. They explained that Emily's case had already been reopened internally once she was admitted. Her statements aligned with several cold cases connected to an old trafficking operation that had operated across multiple provinces in the late 80s and early 90s. Most of the names involved were already dead. Others were serving sentences for unrelated crimes. "But there are gaps," one detective said, "and your daughter's testimony fills some of them." Emily agreed to speak with them. I wasn't allowed in the room. Those 2 hours felt longer than the entire drive to the hospital that first night. When she came out, she looked smaller, drained. "I don't remember faces," she said quietly afterward. "Just rooms, voices, smells. They wanted more than I could give them." I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't need to. That night, Margaret, my wife, finally met her. She walked into the hospital room slowly, as if afraid the moment would shatter if she moved too fast. Emily stood when she saw her. They stared at each other for a heartbeat too long. Then Margaret did something unexpected. She laughed. A broken, breathless sound that turned into a sob halfway through. "My God," she said, hands shaking. "You look just like my sister." Emily blinked. She used to say that. Margaret crossed the room in 3 steps and wrapped her arms around her. Emily stiffened, then melted into her. "I thought I lost you forever," Margaret whispered into her hair. "I never stopped looking for you, not even when they told us to." Emily clung to her like a lifeline. "I didn't stop either," she said. "I just didn't know what I was looking for." The DNA results came back early. 7 days. Laura called me into her office, though she didn't need to. I already knew. "It's a confirmed match," she said softly. "She is your daughter." I sat down because my legs stopped working. 31 years of mourning. 31 years of second-guessing every memory. And now this. "There's more," Laura continued. "The remains you buried in 1996 were retested. They belong to a girl named Hannah Lee. She disappeared from Surrey in 1995. Another family. Another set of parents who had buried hope instead of truth. "They've been notified," Laura said. "They want to speak with you, eventually." I nodded. "Whenever they're ready." Emily came home 3 weeks later. Not to our house. She wasn't ready. We helped her rent a small apartment near the hospital, close to her therapy team, close to familiarity. I assembled furniture while she hovered nearby, commenting on my terrible measuring skills like she used when she was young. "You still do it wrong," she said, smiling faintly. "I do it my way," I replied. "Some days were good." She laughed, cooked, tried to piece together who she was. Other days were unbearable. Nightmares, panic attacks, sudden silences where she'd shut down completely. And through it all, something else lingered. Fear, not of the past, of what might come next. Because someone knew she was alive now. 2 months after she moved into her apartment, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. "Mr. Harris," a man's voice said. "This is Daniel Ross. I represent several parties who may have information relevant to your daughter's history." My grip tightened. "What kind of information?" "Information that could complicate ongoing investigations," he said smoothly, "and potentially reopen matters best left closed." Threat. Polite, wrapped in legal language, but unmistakable. "I think we should meet," he continued. Privately. I ended the call without answering. That night, Emily woke up screaming, not from a memory, from a fear she couldn't explain. "They're watching," she whispered. "I can feel it." And for the first time since she came back into my life, I understood something terrifying. Finding her was only the beginning, because the truth doesn't just heal, it exposes. And someone out there didn't want everything uncovered. Not yet. I didn't tell Emily about the call. Not that night. Not the next morning either. Some truths don't protect when shared too early. They only sharpen fear. And Emily had already lived too long in a world where fear decided everything. But I didn't ignore the warning. I called Laura first, then a lawyer Margaret and I had trusted for years, a quiet man named Peter Hall, who specialized in civil protection and witness security. I didn't tell him everything over the phone, just enough to make him pause longer than usual before answering. "Come in," he said. "Bring everything." 2 days later, I sat across from him in his office, the city humming indifferently outside the window. I explained about the call, the tone, the implication. I told him about Emily's memories returning in fragments and the police interviews. Peter didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back and folded his hands. "You need to assume," he said carefully, "that someone connected to what happened 30 years ago still has something to lose. Most of them are dead or imprisoned." I said. "Yes," he replied, "but not all facilitators end up in handcuffs. Some clean their lives. Some change names. Some build respectable careers. And all of them fear one thing." "What?" "The past becoming present." That night, I installed cameras. Not inside Emily's apartment, that was her space, but in the building entrances, parking areas, and along the street outside. Discreet. Legal. Enough to see patterns. 3 nights later, I saw the first one. A man standing across the street from her building at 11:42 p.m. He didn't approach the door, didn't smoke, didn't check his phone. He just stood there, watching. I watched him from my laptop, breath shallow, heart pounding. At 12:06 a.m., he walked away calmly, unhurried, disappearing around the corner. The next morning, I showed the footage to Peter. "That's surveillance," he said flatly, "not curiosity." Emily noticed my tension immediately. "You're holding something back," she said while stirring soup on the stove. "I can feel it." I sat down across from her. "There are people who don't want the truth coming out," I said slowly. "They might try to scare us." Her hand stilled. "Like before?" "No," I said firmly. "Not like before. This time you're not alone." She nodded, but I could see the old fear pressing at the edges of her calm. 2 days later, her therapist called me. "Emily missed her appointment," she said. She didn't call. My chest tightened. I drove to her apartment immediately. Her door was unlocked. Inside, nothing was broken, nothing stolen. Her phone lay on the table, her bag untouched, but the window was open, and on the counter sat an envelope. No stamp, no address, just my name. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, "She survived because we allowed it. Don't test our patience." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then something else took over. Not panic, precision. I called the police. Then Peter. Then Laura. Within an hour, the apartment was swarming with uniforms. The letter was bagged, fingerprints taken, cameras reviewed. The footage showed Emily leaving the building calmly at 3:18 p.m. with a woman, mid-40s, dark coat, friendly posture. Emily smiled as they walked together. I recognized that posture instantly. It was the same one Emily had described from a night she vanished. Concerned, helpful, non-threatening. A chill moved through me that no blanket could warm. She went willingly. An officer said carefully, "Yes," I replied. "That's the point." 6 hours passed. Then 12. Then my phone rang. Private number. I answered without speaking. "You should have stayed quiet." A man said, "Calm, educated, controlled. You've stirred things that were settled." "Where's my daughter?" I asked. "She's safe. For now." My grip tightened. "What do you want?" "Silence," he said. "And cooperation." "No." A pause. "You don't understand how fragile peace is," he said. "Your daughter adapted. She survived. You're tearing open wounds that never heal cleanly. You stole her life. We shaped it," he replied coolly. "The world is cruel. We gave her structure." I closed my eyes. "You will return her," I said, "or everything you buried comes up." Another pause. Longer this time. Then, "You have 48 hours. The line went dead. I didn't wait. I went public. Not with the media, with leverage. I authorized the police to release details of Emily's survival to multiple task forces across provinces. Names. Patterns. Old cases. I gave them the letter. The footage. The call recording. I told them everything. Within hours, pressure rippled outward. Search warrants were issued. Accounts frozen. Names resurfaced. And just before midnight, my phone rang again. "You've made a mistake," the man hissed. "No," I said. "You did. 31 years ago." There was shouting in the background now. Panic. Movement. "You have no idea what you've unleashed," he snapped. "I do," I said quietly. "Justice doesn't forget. It just waits." Silence. Then a new voice came on the line. Shaking. "We're bringing her back." An hour later, Emily walked into the police station wrapped in a blanket. Unhurt. Shaken. Alive. She ran to me like she had when she was little, arms tied around my waist, face buried in my chest. "They said you wouldn't fight," she whispered. "They said you'd choose peace." I held her harder. "They never knew me," I said. But as the doors closed behind us, I understood something sobering. This wasn't over. Because when you expose monsters, the ones still hiding don't run quietly. They plan, and the next move would be theirs. Emily slept for almost 20 hours straight. Not the restless, nightmare-ridden sleep I'd come to recognize over the past months, but a heavy, exhausted surrender. The kind that comes when the body finally believes it has survived something it wasn't sure it would. I sat in the chair beside her hospital bed the entire time. I didn't close my eyes. Every sound made my spine stiffen. Every footstep in the hallway felt too close. I watched the heart monitor rise and fall like a contract being honored. Proof she was still here, alive. Again, when she woke, she didn't cry. She looked at me with terrifying calm and said, "They're not done." "I know," I replied, "but neither are we." The police wanted statements. Therapists wanted evaluations. Lawyers wanted timelines. I gave them everything. What I didn't give them was trust, because systems are slow, and the people who had taken Emily once had proven they were patient, coordinated, and ruthless in ways that didn't require violence to destroy lives. The man who'd called me never contacted us again. That scared me more than the threats. Silence meant recalculation. Within 48 hours, Emily was relocated under police supervision to a secured residence. Not a safe house. Exactly. Something quieter. Something that didn't feel like a cage. I didn't tell her the full reason. She already carried enough ghosts. But I felt it. Eyes following us when we walked. Cars idling too long at intersections. A man reading the same newspaper outside the cafe for 3 days in a row. Patterns only someone who'd lived through long fear learns to notice. Then came the first official collapse. A man named Oliver Crane, former logistics consultant, now philanthropic investor, was arrested at dawn. His face appeared on the news at night, eyes wide, mouth half open, as if he hadn't realized the world still knew his name. I recognized him instantly. Emily did too. "That's him," she said softly. "Not the one who took me. The one who decided where I went." Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. More arrests followed. Not dramatic raids. Quiet ones. Bank offices. Private residences. Airport lounges. The kind of takedowns meant to prevent last-minute disappearances. But for every name that surfaced, 2 more appeared in the margins. People who'd funded. People who'd transported. People who'd signed papers that looked harmless if you didn't know how to read between the lines. The police called it unraveling. I called it overdue. 3 weeks after Emily was taken the second time, I received a letter. Not typed. Handwritten. Sloppy. Desperate. It was from a woman named Cynthia Hale. Former outreach coordinator. Former caregiver. Former monster in a cardigan. She wanted to talk. She says she wants immunity. The detective told me. She doesn't get it. I replied, but I agreed to be present. The interview room smelled like old coffee and disinfectant. Cynthia sat hunched forward, hands clasped, eyes darting as if she expected the walls to lean in and listen. "I didn't hurt her," she said immediately. "I swear. I fed her. I taught her how to smile right. I kept her alive. I stared at her. You erased her," I said. "That's worse." She flinched. "They told us it was rescue," she whispered. "That these girls were already broken. That we were giving them structure, safety. And the money?" I asked. Her lips pressed thin. "They paid well," she admitted. "And they said if we didn't do it, someone worse would. That lie has been recycled for centuries. Why now?" I asked. "Why talk?" She looked up at me then. "Because they're turning on each other." That landed heavier than any confession. "They always do when the lights come on," she continued. I wasn't supposed to be named. I was background. But Oliver panicked. He started giving up people. Names. Roles. Her breathing quickened. "I'm disposable now." "Yes," I said quietly. "You always were." She broke down crying. But I didn't feel satisfaction. Only the grim clarity that this wasn't about good and evil anymore. It was about containment. 2 days later, a judge issued an order sealing Emily's identity from public records. 3 hours after that, someone leaked it. Not to the media, to a private forum. One that didn't exist on normal browsers. The police caught it within minutes. But minutes are enough. That night, The power went out in my building. Emergency lights flickered on. I stood, heart racing, every instinct screaming. My phone vibrated. A text. Unknown number. You can't protect her forever. I replied with one word. Watch me. The power returned 11 minutes later. No sign of intrusion. No evidence. Which meant it was a message. A reminder. They wanted me afraid. They wanted me reactive. Instead, I went cold. I started preparing. Financial records. Property transfers. Legal contingencies. I put everything I own into structures that couldn't be touched easily. I wrote letters to Emily, sealed, dated, stored in multiple places. Instructions. Truths. Love. Then I did something the police didn't expect. I went looking. Not recklessly. Methodically. I contacted journalists who specialize in long-form investigations. Not headline chasers. Archivists. Pattern hunters. I gave them partial trails. Enough to bait curiosity. Not enough to endanger Emily. Within a week, whispers started. Blogs picked up fragments. Old cases were cross-referenced. A former senator quietly resigned from a foundation board. A shipping company froze operations pending internal review. Pressure spreads differently when it comes from everywhere at once. And then, finally, they made a mistake. They came to me directly, not with threats, with an offer. A man in a gray suit met me in a public park at noon. No sunglasses, no dramatics. I represent people who would like this to stop, he said. You represent cowards, I replied. He smiled thinly. They're willing to compensate you. Relocate your daughter permanently. Ensure comfort. I laughed. A real laugh. You think this is about money? I asked. No, he said carefully. It's about endings. I leaned forward. You don't get one. His smile vanished. You'll regret this. I stood. No, I said. You will. That night, arrests accelerated. The net tightened. Emily slept peacefully for the first time without medication. And as I watched her breathe, I realized something terrifying and beautiful. They'd underestimated one thing. Not my anger, not my resources, but my patience. Because when a father waits 31 years to hold his daughter again, he can wait a little longer to make sure no one ever takes her from him again. And the final reckoning was closer than any of them realized. The first time Emily laughed again, it startled me. It wasn't loud. It wasn't carefree. It slipped out unexpectedly while we were standing in the kitchen of the secure apartment, arguing gently about whether eggs should be cooked slowly or fast. She caught herself, eyes widening, hand flying to her mouth. Then she laughed again. Short, uncertain, real. I leaned against the counter and let the sound wash over me like a miracle I didn't deserve but had been waiting for anyway. For a moment, the world felt normal. That was when my phone rang. Blocked number. I didn't answer. It rang again. And again. Finally, a text appeared. You're forcing our hand. I showed it to Emily. She didn't panic. She nodded slowly and said, So it's starting. That was the moment I understood something vital. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was ready. The police had been careful not to share everything with us, but bits leaked through conversations that stopped too late, glances that lingered too long. They had a name now, not a public one, a structural one, the kind of person who doesn't appear on documents but controls the flow between them. They called him the anchor because nothing moved unless he allowed it. Money, transport, silence. I'd heard the name once before years ago, in a completely different context, spoken casually by a financial advisor who'd assumed I wouldn't understand its relevance. At the time, it meant nothing. Now it meant everything. The anchor wasn't a trafficker. He wasn't a recruiter. He wasn't even a criminal in the traditional sense. He was an organizer, a man who built systems that allowed evil to operate efficiently while he remained legally insulated. And he'd been watching me. I learned that when my bank called, not with a warning, with an apology. Mr. Hale, the woman said carefully, we detected an internal breach related to your accounts. No funds were lost, but access was attempted through a high-level authorization request. From whom? I asked. There was a pause. I can't disclose the name, she said, but it came from a private equity compliance office with government overlap. The anchor didn't need to threaten me. He was showing me what he could touch. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the table, paper spread out like a map of my life, and I realized something with bone-deep clarity. He wasn't trying to scare me into silence. He was preparing to remove me. Quietly, legally, permanently. Emily sensed it too. She started asking questions she hadn't asked before. About my finances. About wills. About power of attorney. About what would happen to her if I disappeared. I answered honestly. Then I changed everything. I transferred guardianship contingencies. I assigned trustees. I recorded statements with sealed instructions. And then I did the one thing the anchor wouldn't expect. I went public. Not loudly. Strategically. I agreed to an interview with a journalist named Aaron Cole. He wasn't famous. That's why I chose him. Aaron specialized in stories that took years to break and seconds to explode. We met in a quiet office above a bookstore. No cameras, just a recorder and a man who knew how to listen. I didn't give him Emily's story. I gave him mine. The father who lost a daughter. The father who buried a coffin. The father who discovered that some systems thrive on grief because grief keeps people quiet. Aaron didn't interrupt. When I finished, he said one sentence. They'll come for you. I know, I replied. Good, he said. That means we're close. The article didn't run immediately. It didn't need to. The rumor of it was enough. 2 foundations froze donations. A consulting firm shut down its humanitarian outreach wing overnight. The anchor was losing traction. That's when he finally revealed himself. Not by name, by presence. I was walking back to the apartment when a man stepped into my path. Late 50s, well-dressed, ordinary face. Too ordinary. I wonder when you'd stop hiding behind intermediaries. I said. He smiled faintly. You're not as impressive as they said, he replied, and you're more predictable than you think. We stood there, city noise flowing around us like water around stones. You should stop, he said. This ends badly for people like you. People like me? I asked. Fathers, he said softly. Men who believe love gives them leverage. I took a step closer. No, I said, love gives me endurance. His smile vanished. You're making this personal, he said. You made it personal 31 years ago. I replied. He studied me. Then he leaned in just enough for me to smell expensive cologne and something colder beneath it. You won't win, he whispered. I already have, I said. You're standing here. He stepped back and walked away. 2 days later, the article dropped. Not the full story. Just enough. Names weren't named, but patterns were. And once patterns are visible, they can't be unseen. The anchor vanished. Not physically. Operationally. Accounts locked. Partners defected. Silence where coordination used to be. Emily watched the news coverage without speaking. When it ended, she looked at me. Is it over? She asked. No, I said, but it's collapsing. That night, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. One message. You've taught us caution. I deleted it because caution was too little, too late. Weeks passed, then months. The trials began. Not dramatic, methodical, paper by paper, testimony by testimony. Emily testified behind a screen. Her voice didn't shake. Mine did. Watching her, the anchor was never charged. Not yet, but his empire fractured. And empires don't need convictions to die. They just need exposure. One evening, Emily and I stood on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker on. She leaned against me. I don't feel hunted anymore, she said. I closed my eyes. Neither do I. Somewhere out there, a man who'd built a system to erase people was learning the cost of being seen. And for the first time in decades, I allowed myself to believe something dangerous. That the worst was behind us. That the silence ahead might finally be peaceful. But peace, I would soon learn, always sends a bill. The bill for peace arrived on a Tuesday morning. Not in the mail, not by phone. It arrived as silence. The kind that doesn't feel calm. It feels staged. Emily noticed it before I did. They've stopped reacting, she said, scrolling through her phone. No leaks. No counter stories. No denials. That was wrong. People like the anchor never went quiet unless they were regrouping or abandoning pieces to save the core. I poured coffee I didn't drink and stared out the window at a city that suddenly felt too open. They're cutting losses, I said, which means someone's about to be offered up. That someone turned out to be a woman named Clara Ionescu. Her name appeared in a sealed filing that Aaron forwarded to me late that night. Mid-level administrator. Logistics. Documentation cleanup. She wasn't powerful. She was useful. And now she was disposable. She'll flip? Emily said after reading the summary. Yes, I replied. But they'll make sure she flips the right way. 2 days later, Clara was found dead. Official cause, suicide. Unofficial truth, pressure. No note, no history, just enough ambiguity to poison momentum. Emily stared at the news coverage, jaw clenched. They're trying to scare us back into silence. They're reminding us what winning costs. I said, that night, she had nightmares. Not screaming ones. Quiet ones. The kind where she sat up suddenly and whispered, "Don't let go." I didn't sleep. I watched the door, the cameras, the shadows between headlights. For the first time since she came back into my life, I felt afraid. Not of losing her, but of surviving long enough to see her pay the price for my stubbornness. The police warned us gently. "We can't protect you forever," one officer said. "Visibility cuts both ways." I nodded. I understood. That was when Emily did something I hadn't expected. She asked to speak to Aaron again. Alone. I tried to protest. She stopped me with a look that was older than her years. "They've always spoken for me," she said. "I want my words on record." The interview wasn't released immediately, but it existed, and existence is power. In it, she didn't describe what was done to her in detail. She described what it took from her. Years, language, certainty, identity. She spoke calmly, without tears. That terrified the wrong people. Within 48 hours, a civil injunction was filed against us. Not criminal, financial. An attempt to freeze my assets pending investigation into potential misrepresentation related to past estate declarations. They were trying to cripple us without touching us. To force dependency. Emily read the notice and laughed bitterly. They still think money is a leverage. I called my attorney. He didn't sound surprised. "They're escalating sideways," he said. "It's a sign of weakness." "It still works," I replied. "Yes," he agreed, "but only if you flinch." I didn't flinch. I liquidated what I could, transferred the rest. I made myself financially smaller and legally harder to grab. That was when the call came. Private number. I almost ignored it. Almost. "Mr. Hale," a voice said. Older. Tired. Female. "You don't know me, but I know you." "Then speak," I said. "My name doesn't matter," she replied. "What matters is that I helped build the systems you're dismantling." I said nothing. "I'm not proud," she continued, "but I'm not loyal anymore." "What do you want?" I asked. "To stop running," she said, "and to make sure the right people fall." She had documents, records, connections, names. Not the anchor. Not yet, but close enough to bruise him. We met in daylight, in public. She slid a flash drive across the table and said one sentence before leaving. They taught us that consequences were optional. They were wrong. What followed was not dramatic. It was administrative. Subpoenas, audits, quiet resignations. An entire foundation dissolved itself overnight. Emily watched it unfold with strange calm. "I don't feel victorious," she said one evening. "You don't have to," I replied. "You just have to be free." She shook her head. "I don't think freedom is the end," she said. "I think it's the beginning of learning how to live with what can't be fixed." I didn't have an answer for that. Neither did the world. The anchor resurfaced indirectly. A proxy firm filed a defamation claim. It was weak, Desperate, it failed within days. And then nothing. No messages. No threats. No shadows. Just absence, which felt worse. Until the night Emily stood in the doorway of my study. "I won't go back to where it happened," she said. My heart dropped. "You don't have to." "I know," she replied, "but I need to see it without fear." We went. Daytime. Crowded street. The bus stop where her life had split in two. She stood there quietly, watched people pass. Then she took a breath and stepped forward. Nothing happened. No collapse. No flashback. Just a woman standing where a girl had once been taken. She turned to me. "They don't own this place anymore," she said. I nodded, tears burning my eyes. "They never did," I said. On the way home, she fell asleep in the passenger seat. Peaceful, I let myself believe again that maybe this was it. That maybe the system had finally cracked enough to stay broken. I was wrong, because systems don't die quietly. They lash out one last time. The last strike didn't come from the shadows. It came in daylight, dressed as procedure. I knew something was wrong when the letter arrived by courier instead of email. Thick envelope, government seal. The kind of thing designed to make your hands shake before you even open it. Emily was in the kitchen, humming softly as she made tea. The sound grounded me long enough to keep my face neutral. "What is it?" she asked, noticing the envelope. "Just paperwork," I said. It was a lie, not to protect her from fear. She had survived worse, but because some moments need to be absorbed alone before they're shared. The document inside was a formal notice of intent. Not criminal, not civil, psychiatric. They were petitioning for a competency review, claiming that my recent actions, liquidating assets, transferring funds, refusing settlement offers, indicated impaired judgment. They wanted a court-appointed evaluator. A hearing. A door cracked open just enough to walk through and never return from. I sat down slowly. Emily came over, read the first page, then looked at me. "They're trying to do to you what they tried to do to me," she said. "Yes," I replied. "And they're counting on me reacting emotionally." She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She smiled. Not kindly. Precisely. "Good," she said. "Then we know where to aim." The hearing was scheduled for 10 days later. 10 days to dismantle a narrative that had taken years to build. 10 days to prove sanity to a system that thrived on calling dissent madness. Aaron wasn't optimistic. "They'll bring experts," he warned. "People with credentials who sound calm and authoritative. They'll use your age, your isolation, your recent stress." "And Emily?" I asked. "They'll say you're being manipulated by trauma," he said carefully. "That you're acting out of guilt." Emily leaned forward. "Then I'll testify," she said. Aaron hesitated. That could cut both ways. "I know," she replied. "That's why it works." The days before the hearing were oddly quiet. Too quiet. No threats. No press leaks. No sudden filings. Just preparation on their side, and on ours. I underwent my own evaluation voluntarily. Full cognitive battery. Memory. Reasoning. Impulse control. The psychiatrist, a woman with sharp eyes and no patience for theatrics, finished the session and said one sentence. "You're not impaired," she said. "You're angry. Those are not the same." I thanked her. Emily spent hours writing. Not statements. Letters. To herself. To the girl she had been. To the woman she was becoming. She burned most of them. Kept one. On the morning of the hearing, she handed it to me. "Read this if I freeze," she said. The courthouse was modern. Glass. Steel. Designed to look transparent, while obscuring everything that mattered. The other side arrived first. 3 attorneys. 2 expert witnesses. 1 familiar face I hadn't seen in years. The anchor. Older. Thinner. Still immaculate. He didn't look at me. Didn't need to. His presence was the message. The judge was efficient. Unimpressed. She listened. They spoke first. Painted a picture of a grieving father driven by obsession, of reckless decisions, of influence, of danger to himself and others. They used words like fixation and projection. Then it was my turn. I answered questions calmly, directly, no speeches, no dramatics. I let the record speak. Then Emily stood. The room shifted, not because she was loud, because she wasn't. She spoke evenly, clearly. She didn't describe the abuse. She described the erasure. What it feels like to be told your memory is unreliable, your pain inconvenient, your resistance pathological. She looked at the judge. At no point, she said, did my father ask me what to do. He asked me what I needed. That is not control. That is respect. Then she turned to the other side. To call someone unstable because they refuse silence, she said, is how this system survives. The anchor finally looked up. For the first time, his composure cracked. The judge recessed for 15 minutes. Longest 15 minutes of my life. Emily squeezed my hand. No matter what, she said, we don't lose the day. When the judge returned, her ruling was brief. The petition was denied, dismissed with prejudice. She ordered the opposing counsel to cease further filings without new evidence. And then, unexpectedly, she added something. I suggest, she said, that those involved consider whether persistence serves justice or merely power. It was over, or so I thought. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Not many. Enough. Emily ignored them. The anchor didn't. He stopped, turned, spoke one sentence. This is not finished. I didn't respond. Neither did Emily. That night, she didn't sleep. Neither did I. Because systems don't threaten unless they've lost control. At 2:14 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. A whisper. You were right. A voice said. He's scared. Who is this? I asked. A door. The voice replied. One you cracked open. What do you want? To end it. How? By showing everyone what he buried. The file arrived an hour later. Encrypted. Thick. Video. Audio. Names. Not just trafficking. Not just silence. Cover-ups. Bribes. Judicial influence. Charitable fronts laundering blood. Emily watched the first 10 minutes. Then closed the laptop. That's enough, she said. I believe you. We gave it to Aaron. He paled. This will burn everything, he said. Good, Emily replied. Some things need fire. The release wasn't immediate. Strategic. Coordinated. Timed. When it hit, it wasn't explosive. It was devastating. Resignations. Arrests. Foundations collapsing overnight. The anchor disappeared. No statements. No denials. Just gone. Emily watched the news in silence. Finally, she spoke. I don't feel lighter, she said. I know, I replied. But you're no longer carrying alone. She nodded. I think, she said, that's enough for now. We packed a bag. Just one. Left the city. No destination. Just movement. Because survival, I'd learned, isn't about winning. It's about choosing when to stop fighting and when to live. The silence after everything burned was heavier than the noise before it. No sirens. No headlines screaming my name. No more late-night calls that made my chest tighten before I answered. Just morning light through unfamiliar curtains and the sound of Emily breathing evenly beside me in a small rental apartment 2 cities away from anywhere that mattered. For the first time since that 3:47 a.m. phone call months ago, there was nothing chasing us. And that, I learned, was its own kind of fear. Emily woke first. She always did now. Trauma rewires your sense of time. Sleep comes in fragments, but mornings arrive sharp and alert. She sat up slowly, as if testing whether the world would still allow it. It's quiet, she said. Yes, I replied. She nodded, absorbing it. Then softly, I don't know what to do when nothing's on fire. I didn't either. For decades, my life had been defined by reaction. First grief, then searching, then rage disguised as patience. Purpose had always been tethered to pain. Now the pain was still there, but the mission was gone. We made coffee, burnt the toast, laughed at it. That was new. The fallout unfolded without us. Arrests happened quietly. Court dates were scheduled months out. Names were redacted, then slowly revealed. The anchor was confirmed to have left the country. His assets were frozen. His charities dissolved into investigations. He never contacted us again. Emily followed none of it closely. "I don't want to memorize his downfall," she said one afternoon when I offered an update. "I spent enough of my life memorizing him." Instead, she focused on small things. Walking the same route every morning. Learning the names of birds she heard, but couldn't see. Touching objects in a room just to prove they were real. One day, she asked if I remembered her favorite color as a child. "Green," I said immediately. "Not bright green. Moss green." She stared at me, stunned. "You remembered that?" I remembered everything. I said, I just didn't know where to put it. That night, she cried harder than she ever had when the truth came out. Because grief doesn't end when the danger does. It begins again, clean and sharp, when you finally feel safe enough to mourn. Weeks passed, then months. Emily began volunteering, quietly, anonymously, at a support center under a name that wasn't hers, but wasn't a lie either. She didn't tell her story. She listened to others. She learned when to speak, and when silence was a greater kindness. I watched her grow into herself, not the daughter I lost, not the woman who survived hell, but someone new, someone forged from both. One evening, sitting on the balcony with the city humming below us, she asked me a question I'd been waiting for. "Why didn't you give up on me?" she asked. I didn't answer immediately, because the truth wasn't poetic. It wasn't noble. I didn't know how. I finally said, "I tried. People told me I should, that it was healthier. But every version of my life without you felt wrong, like I was borrowing someone else's future." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "They almost convinced me you didn't want me back," she whispered. The words cut deeper than anything the anchor had ever done. "I always wanted you," I said. "I just didn't know where you were." Spring turned into summer. The trial dates were set. Emily was asked, requested, pressured to testify publicly. She declined. "They already took enough of my voice," she said. "I won't let them take the rest in the name of closure." Instead, her recorded testimony was submitted privately. It was enough. The convictions came without spectacle. Guilty pleas, plea deals, long sentences buried under legal language. Justice didn't roar. It exhaled. We returned to our old city once. Just once. Not to reclaim anything. Just to stand where it had all broken. The hospital parking lot looked smaller than I remembered. The bus stop had been repainted. The world had not waited. Emily stood quietly, then turned away without ceremony. "I don't need this place anymore," she said. Neither did I. We went home, if you could call a place home when you were still learning what that word meant. Margaret visited. She hugged Emily carefully, as if afraid she might vanish again. "I'm so glad you're here," she said, voice breaking. "So am I," Emily replied, and meant it. The boys came later. Awkward, emotional, real. Time did what time does best. It softened edges without erasing scars. On the anniversary of the night Emily disappeared, she asked me to build something with her. Not a treehouse, a bench. We worked in silence, measuring twice, cutting once. I was still bad with a hammer. She teased me for it. When we finished, she ran her hand over the wood and smiled. "This is good," she said. "Something that stays." We sat on it at dusk. No speeches, no conclusions, just presence. Years were stolen from us. Nothing could change that. But what remained, what we built after, was ours. And that was enough. Before you leave, do one small thing for me. If MY's story stayed with you, subscribe to the channel and share where you're watching from. Stories like this survive because they're passed on, and someone out there may need to hear more than they realize.